I'm Tim Marlow, sometime broadcaster, previously artistic director of the Royal Academy, and now the director of the Design Museum. And I'm delighted to be chairing an event with such an illustrious panel this evening, and to welcome you all back in the flesh to only the second in-person event the RTS has done since lockdown. It's a good feeling. The premise of tonight's discussion is this a golden age of arts television? And I suppose that is a question that's often asked, but thinking about the experience that I had and others had during lockdown, when I was, certainly at the beginning, flailing around trying to work out how to save an institution I'd just taken over with, and living in a house with my wife, who was a producer at the BBC, who was putting the Mary Beard lockdown culture programme into play, I realised quite how brilliantly television responded. And so I think actually the quality of what was done and the speed with which it was done during lockdown, Grayson's Art Club, the way that live streaming, Marquee TV, the way that Sky Arts went free to air, the way the BBC continued its commitment to public service, the proms were eventually put on, and so on, means that the question isn't more than just a tokenistic nod in the direction of every decade we ask this question. I think there's real purpose to it. The panel tonight, who are also going to be wrestling with the processes of what we see on television, how it gets on the screen, how the commissioning process works, and what the future might hold, are an illustrious group, starting with Mark Bell, the commissioning editor for arts at the BBC and also arts coordinator at the BBC, Barbara Lee, who's commissioning editor for arts and entertainment at Sky Arts, Shaminder Nahal, who is commissioning editor for arts and topical specialist factual at Channel 4, and Simon Walker, who's the CEO and co-founder of Marquee TV. I'm going to ask each of them briefly to explain their role in the organisation that they currently sit, and then there is a sizzle for their channel, and then we can get stuck into the discussion. So, Mark, where do you sit at the BBC? You've been there for a good long time. What's your role?
Yeah, I'm a commissioning editor for arts. I've been there for, nearly a decade, about a decade, and I've done various jobs within the team during that time. I'm currently looking after predominantly series, sort of landmark series, I suppose, in TV they call it, and single documentaries, including the Imagine and Arena strands. So that's probably enough.
Barbara Lee.
Hi, I'm Barbara Lee. I'm a commissioning editor at Sky Arts. I've been there. I did what you did. I tried to work out how long I'd been there today and realised it's 9 years. So my slate is as diverse, really, as our output. So I look after all kinds of things, from formats, documentaries, events, music, all kinds of things.
Shaminder.
I'm Shaminder Nahal. I'm the commissioning. I couldn't remember what it was for a minute. I was so bowled over by those things. Yeah. I'm a commissioning editor for arts at Channel 4, but because our sort of slate is smaller than my lovely colleagues, we don't have a whole channel, or like 500 channels in the case of Mark. I also look after quite a lot of history and topical programmes. So the biggest thing that I look after is our sort of, he would hate me saying that, but our national treasure, Grayson Perry, and his programmes. But I also, we have to sort of carve out a sort of slightly different identity for art. So I have a sort of sideline in kind of body part arts programming. So I did 100 Vaginas, Me and My Penis, and we've got another body part coming soon. Well, you'll have to wait for it, but you know, there've been lots of discussions about it, but there's that, and then I do history programs, as I said, like we've got a series with Satnam Sanghera about Empire, starting on Saturday, 9 p.m, Channel 4, don't miss it, and a sort of topical chat show called Unapologetic. I also co-commissioned the Big Nasty show, so I view our arts and culture slate as quite broad.
Simon.
Hello. Hi, so I'm Simon Walker. I'm the co-founder and the CEO of Marquee TV. What's my role? Well, you know, I invented it on the back of an envelope a few years ago, where we thought there's an opportunity in the market for a dedicated brand for performing arts and culture. And we saw the kind of the streaming world explode and start to polarize a bit. And we thought that there's a real opportunity for the passion, the global brand for arts on demand. So that's what we do. We're still a startup, right? So I'm looking at these trailers and I'm thinking to myself, the amount of money on screen there would be, just for your sizzle reels, would cover our commissioning budget for most of last year. And our entire team is globally is probably about the size of the promo and sizzle reel departments at BBC and Sky. But we are growing really fast. Half our team, so 5 of us, are in London and half are in New York. And we have subscribers in 120 countries already. So we've obviously tapped into something, and we're unashamedly about performing arts. And I think the thing that's interesting that hopefully will come out in the discussion is we're coming at this from the ecosystem of arts organisations rather than from a TV commissioning point of view. So we work really, really closely with arts organisations to help them do digital and streaming, but also to commission works that will appear on stage or go on tour, but not necessarily have ever been filmed before or have an audience out in the real world. So I can give you tons of examples, but I'll shut up and let Tim ask me later.
Simon, I'll start with you actually. I think the premise is mainly based on the admirable amount of choice. And if you look at the range of what you've all commissioned and put on our screens, there is a phenomenal amount of choice, and it's rarely formulaic. You know, there are certain things that have exploded, like practitioner or participant arts television, but there's many other forms too. Is your model scalable into other arts, or is the model going forward, it's going to be with performing arts, that's where you're focused?
It's a really good question. I think that people actually don't want more choice, controversially. I think people want better things. Actually, they just want better content. They want curation, and they want a brand. They want a hand to guide them through this. And I think that's kind of where we're coming at it from. So we're trying to make Marquee the brand that is your ultimate arts companion, and it is digital and digital first and content led, but it could be more than that. I mean, you can buy tickets through. If you're a Marquee TV premium member, you get a discount on theatre tickets and concert tickets. It could be a community, it could be a loyalty or rewards program, it could be travel. So we're trying to build a brand for arts lovers and culture curious people. And at the moment, and we started with dance because it does very, very well on online video, basically, because it's eye-catching, it's global. I don't need to translate the ballet, right? Dance, opera, theatre, classical music. And we waited a long time before we launched music, actually, because it looked a bit boring, and we needed to find new ways to capture it. And actually, interestingly, the pandemic helped with that, because suddenly we could shoot the London Philharmonic Orchestra without it being, there's a stage, here's the camera, and you're just trying to take a seat out from the audience and capture it. We could capture them in the green room, and they could walk around the auditorium, and it could be a much more engaging thing. So I think it's about brand, it's about curation, and our team, I'm sure, will decide that we need spoken word, we need visual arts, I'm sure they will extend what the brand is about as we kind of engage more with audiences and engage more with the arts organisations. But the partners we have at the moment from the RSC and the Royal Opera House and the New York City Ballet and Bolshoi and Washington, they've found, I hope, a great partner in us, and the audience has found a great brand to curate this stuff together, because it's a bit hard to navigate if you don't know your arias from your elbows, as it were.
That's another channel, an upcoming Channel 4 series. Barbara, Sky Arts has an amazing range of programming and subjects covered. Is that a problem sometimes? Because it is a vast landscape that constitutes arts. I mean, we might actually talk about what the parameters are for you, but are you compelled to survey the vast landscape from music to dance to visual arts to architecture and so on?
Well, I mean, for us, our kind of passion and what we want to do is bring arts to everyone. That's been the whole thing. It's the purpose of the channel. And arts, as you say, are very diverse. And the audience is very diverse. And also, I mean, we're the only dedicated arts channel, so we have a huge audience to serve. I mean, we know people don't come and sit on a channel to watch us all night. They come in to find the thing that they like. And so we try and serve them with that. When we do a bit like you said, your arias from your elbows, I kind of go, we do from Glyndebourne to Grime, and everything's sort of in between. So we have our big sort of tentpole shows like Portrait Artist, and they bring us big audiences, and through that portal then, you want to be able to show them the range of content that we have, and to show that there's kind of something for everyone. We don't want to kind of segment our audience and only cater for a particular audience. We want people who love rock, and they'll come in and watch Brian Johnson. We want people who love opera. So we have a huge audience to serve, but the whole purpose behind Sky Arts, and particularly now going free to air, is to I suppose, help people really appreciate that art is diverse, you know, and that's the thing. And that rock music is art, opera is art.
Is television art?
It depends if it's done well, doesn't it, really? Yeah, it can be, of course. But I mean, our whole thing, as I said, is to just not for it to be about a voyeuristic experience and it's just looking at a program on a box that we all do in our living room. We want it to be about participation, inclusivity, to, you know, represent a diversity of voices, you know, from all over the country. So we've set this out as a purpose, and actually the audience are really responding to it. You know, so they will come for niche programming. You know, we've done spoken word and we won a BAFTA for Life and Rhymes, which we're thrilled about. And that's a niche audience, but we serve them well. You know, it was a very authentic, credible way of representing spoken word. It's not going to hit 1 million, but that doesn't bother us. We don't have to, you know, we're not commercially driven. We don't have to hit those kind of commercial targets.
No, it's interesting that you say you don't have to, you acknowledge that you don't have loyalty to the channel, because a lot of channels, certainly in the past, the BBC certainly do this, and they do it in radio and television. They talk about a BBC One audience or a Radio 4 audience. I mean, I find that crazy, but okay, that's the way, you know, I'm promiscuous, maybe I'm the exception, but you know, I look across the channels. Yeah. But with Channel 4, there's definitely a notion of what Channel 4 arts is, and definitely what Channel 4 arts isn't. Is that quite helpful, or do you want to break free of all of that?
I mean, I'd love to hear what you think about that. I mean, I'd love to think that were true, and I'd love to think that people found it a really clear proposition. And as I was saying before, I think our job is a little bit more different. We do feel that there's a sort of, it's quite hard to describe sometimes, but there is a sort of, you know, a sort of Channel 4 DNA, a sort of sense of mischief that we try, a sort of sense of provocation and challenge that we try and sort of bring out across our channel. And I hope that that comes through as well in our arts programming. I suppose with our arts, because we don't have the range and we aren't literally all-encompassing like a lot of what you were talking about, is I think we're trying to sort of make sense of the times we're in a lot of the time. And I think going back in time, some of the most amazing things Channel 4 Arts done did that. You remember, you know, Jeremy Deller's Battle of Augury, for instance, you know, and I'm not pretending at all, I wish I could have commissioned something as brilliant as that now. In time, we'll have some amazing works that tell us really profound things about what we've all been through. But I think with Grayson's Art Club, it was genuinely an attempt to sort of do an arts programme that did sort of try and take the temperature of the nation. And when Neil Crombie, who's one of the most talented people I've ever worked with at Swan Films, who's done all of Grayson Perry's programmes, when we were talking initially, it was genuinely sort of just feeling our way through, you know, we're all in lockdown, what are we going to do about this, how can we sort of develop, we all loved, you know, Take Heart back in the day, and we were sort of thinking about, you know, what can we do? And it started as quite a small idea, and we were taken by surprise about how much people really got involved. And I know people were sort of at home and, you know, were sort of doing things in a different way, and maybe making things became a sort of just a way of passing the time, but it really grew and grew. And I suppose it made me think in lots of new ways, and Swan and everyone involved in it, and Grayson, was that, you know, it started to ask lots of other questions about what arts TV is for, and, you know, how can it help us? You know, can art actually help us? And I know that can sound like a bit of a sort of pretentious thing to say, but it genuinely did when we talked to people. It helped a lot of people who were sort of struggling. I mean, we all know that art can help with sort of mental health stuff, but it genuinely was helping. So it sort of felt like we were sort of unwrapping lots of feelings and lots of sort of shared experiences, which felt quite new for the way we had been talking about arts before. And it sort of genuinely then ended up not just being about art, but about the sort of club aspect of it. So, for instance, we ended up having, you know, the Facebook group now has more than 100,000 people on it. In where, you know, when we did series 2, we were getting hundreds and hundreds and thousands of people sending in their work. It has a real life aspect. Like we did an exhibition at Manchester Art Gallery, which was just sold out, and they had to keep extending it. And that has a sort of real world thing. We're opening an exhibition in Bristol in the beginning of December. So it's sort of grown into something that's more than a TV show, which is what I find really exciting. And it's really made me sort of challenge myself about, we've sort of unpacked something. The pandemic allowed us to sort of throw open a lot of questions. And where do we go from here now? So when you sort of say, is it a golden period for arts? I kind of think it is a golden period for how we think about art, and we think about TV and art, and it's sort of an interesting challenge, and we will have to try and come up with some answers about where we go from here.
Yeah, and I mean, I won't say you lucked out, because you had the vision as a channel to work with Grayson from the beginning. But Grayson is a kind of gift, because he's a great commentator, he's very engaging. You know, I've known him a long time, he's the same on screen as he is in the flesh. And he's always aligned his television projects with a project that involves his art, that it became actually the way that his next exhibition would either be explored or created. And so it was a fantastic sort of synergy during lockdown. But as you say, it became more about social purpose as much as anything else, or a kind of psychoanalysis of the nation with Philippa.
That's fascinating, isn't it? Because we all know that art's exciting in a time of huge social change. But I think that's what I think is so interesting about the sort of the future, and what do we take from this period, and where does it...
Yeah, but it does depend quite strongly on the personality of an individual.
Yeah, totally.
And
The credibility on the authenticity. I mean, I think that's the thing we both share. We were chatting a little bit about that, but I think you're right. I mean, in a way, the pandemic has taught us all a lot. You know, I mean, we have always looked at the purpose of the channel in Art for Everyone. And if you look at Art for Everyone, what does that mean? Well, that means getting art out there, enabling people to participate in it, to be included in it, and for it not just to be that experience. So you're right, when you talk about the golden age, I mean, it's very hard to talk about a golden age in television when you look at the arts and culture being decimated, you know, like music. You talked about the Design Museum. I mean, it's been a really grim time for a lot of people. And I think you're right, we've all had to look at how we started talking about it a bit like you did. I think we all kind of eyes down at home on the screen, looking at how we can repurpose ourselves to kind of help support. I mean, we talk about cultural recovery, and that's been a purpose for us. How do we help get musicians musicing, you know, actors acting, dancers dancing? So we repurposed some of our shows. So we thought about how we could do that, and a bit like you talked about, Grace, which I loved. We had to look at Portrait Artist, which is one of our biggest shows, our biggest show. We couldn't do it with an audience, but we did it without an audience, but also tapped into the community, all right? People painting at home, forming these communities. They set up their own Facebook. Well, we've set up a Facebook group that's still active. I mean, you'll know from Grayson, these people are very vocal and really passionate about what they do. So there's kind of a few accidental learnings that are really interesting about these communities who want to talk. The book club had the same effect.
Let me just bring Mark in at this point, because certainly if you look at the BBC, when you talk about the BBC's golden age of arts television, it usually harks back to the Late Show, and you know, for better or worse, that was a programme that went out every night of the week in the evening. So that's seen as a kind of one of the benchmarks. Then there are the production of landmark programmes, and then there would be the idea that there is a channel BBC 4, where there's a lot of arts commissioning can happen, but of course that's now being sort of slightly reconfigured. So do you think the BBC is still playing its part in this golden age, or do you refute the idea that we're in a golden age anyway?
No, I do. I acknowledge that the pandemic's been hard for the arts and been hard for television. You know, television is quite hard to make in the pandemic sometimes. But I think overall, if you're looking at a decade kind of thing, I think it's been I think we're in an extraordinary time. I think television is incredibly productive and fertile at the moment. I think the arts are too. I think there's a huge amount of interest in money flowing into the arts generally, despite the lack of box office that there's been over the last couple of years. So the golden age of BBC arts television, clearly there was a really clear post-Newsnight commitment to arts on television on BBC Two in the early 90s, and it ran for quite a long time. But that was effectively making arts television for quite a particular audience who would stay up late at night and be committed to it, and it was therefore quite capped. I think what the BBC has done for the last 50 years or more, and I'd argue that we almost invented arts documentary making, has shown a commitment to the arts that's broader than that. And I think it's about art and the arts. I think it's about making television out of it, and I think it's about ideas as well, and I think it also belongs to the ecology of television as much as it belongs to the ecology of art. And I don't think we should be thinking about it as in isolation. I think we should be thinking about it in the television context. What do people want to watch on the TV? And make TV that people will respond to, along with the other TV, some of which is great, much of which is great, much of which, you know, is made by my illustrious co-panelists. So, you know, that's what I think about it. And I think that therefore TV is more about making great stories that belong in the context of kind of great television storytelling, great documentaries where the authors like Grayson do something different in TV. That's what we get excited about, as much as, you know, here's a special place late in the schedule where, you know, you might come to watch your esoteric art chat.
That's interesting. So, yeah, art's place in the broad culture
Yeah.
is implicitly and explicitly acknowledged. You also, all of you have alluded to partnerships with and working alongside institutions. And that seems like a kind of sea change, because certainly even 10 years ago, certainly 15, 20 years ago, institutions were kind of pitching in a kind of press office-y way, we're doing this exhibition, will you cover it? And now there is a much more symbiotic relationship, or relationship around partnership, where, I mean, Simon, you're doing it in a very explicit way. Mark, you're coordinator of arts at the BBC. Shaminder, you're definitely working with institutions, and Sky Arts are working numerously. How does that work? I mean, it might be interesting for people out there who are making television programs or want to pitch television programs. How do these relationships work with institutions? How restrictive are the institutions? How much exclusivity do they want? How promiscuous are they? How does that work?
Sort of depends on the project, really, doesn't it? I mean, I think that's the thing. I mean, you talked about enjoying Romeo and Juliet. I mean, that was, you know, the National Theatre have their own live streaming service. I think there's always been a kind of philosophical sort of reluctance to partner with TV companies to put on, you know, their content on a digital platform, because everyone has their own streaming service, which is great. But I think when the pandemic hit and you're thinking about production shut down for a lot of institutions, and it's kind of how do you still get that content out there to people, for people to enjoy. So I think there was a kind of slight shift. Who knows what will happen? I mean, we don't know where that's going to take us, but I think certainly we've always talked to artists and institutions. A lot of our content, not a lot of, but some of our content certainly comes from artists. I think if you want credibility at the heart of it, then, you know, that's a very valuable relationship to have. Others we would go out and form relationships with. So, for example, we did a big piece about the power and purpose of public art called Landmark, which was a format series, a competitive series, but we wanted to invest in public art. And it made sense for us then to find a partner for that end piece, and Coventry City of Culture, it's their City of Culture. So we thought, let's partner with them and we'll gift them a big piece of public art. So I think it sort of varies and depends on each piece, to be honest.
What's the motivation for most of the partnerships, from the partnership perspective, the individuals? Do they want they want to broaden their audience, and they want people to come and visit the Melbourne City Ballet or the Coliseum?
Yeah, it's a bit of that, and it is a little bit of, you know, the reach, right? I'm the London Philharmonic Orchestra. I know I can get X number of people into the South Bank and sell Y number of tickets. But I know if this is captured in a brilliant way, and I have a partner like Marquee TV, this can be seen in 100 countries, and I can get 10x, 100x the audience. And by the way, those people might want to come to the South Bank. And some of those people are geographically limited from ever attending, and economically limited as well. I mean, it's bloody expensive to go to the arts in London or Birmingham or whatever. So we have a very, interestingly, our audience, you know, we've got two peaks. We've got the kind of your classic arts audience who are sort of 50 plus, not very ethnically diverse and quite well off. And then we've got this extraordinary young audience of sort of 18 to 25s who sort of come for extraordinary dance but then get hooked in, because we're multi-genre. We're performing arts, but we're multi-genre. So the partnerships are, from the arts organisation point of view, they're like, you can get me in front of a new audience who, one, we're never going to come anyway, so it's not cannibalising anything that I would have, a ticket sale I'd have lost. It might drive new audience to me when we can travel again. And these are the young audience that I'm losing. So it's very, very exciting for them. But strategic, I'm a strategy guy, right? I joined the BBC in 1997 as the kind of first head of on-demand media when there was no bloody on-demand media, right? Netflix had launched in 1997, but for the next 10 years, while me and BBC colleagues, one of whom I saw here, was thinking about on-demand video, Netflix did another 10 years of shipping DVDs in the post. It wasn't until 2007 they went on-demand. But what's interesting is, it was another 6 years before they made an original piece of content, House of Cards, in 2013. So my kind of take on what can happen in the ecosystem, this is why I talk about the ecosystem rather than television. If you think about the industry, what Netflix has done for drama, creating this enormous pot of money that has created an enormous, value added one way or another in terms of screenwriters and actors and directors and crew and facilities and all of that. Why can't that happen in the arts world, right? Each of these arts organizations we work with is a production company. They just kind of don't think of themselves as that. And while our television colleagues can work with them in the television way of, you fight for your budget, you've got a bit of commissioning budget, and you'll go for it, and you make amazing things with them. And Romeo and Juliet, and we'd love to have that, amazing. What we can work with them to do is say, look, let's help. I mean, oftentimes they don't even understand the rights that they have. They will have filmed things and not really understand whether they can stick that on a TV service or a streaming service. So, but again, it reminds me, when we launched iPlayer at the BBC, I was part of the team that developed all of that thinking, and everyone said, you can't do it, we don't own any on-demand rights. So, 20 years ago, me and a bloke called Bal Samra got in a cab and went around London to see Pact and Equity and everybody and said, we're going to do this. It wasn't streaming then, we're going to do an on-demand video thing. We'd really like it if we could show Dad's Army, and no one had thought of Dad, So what's going to happen in my view, in our view, around the arts is, you're going to see these amazing, all we do in media is connect the artist with the audience, right, one way or another. And the artists, the agents, the arts organizations, the talent there, have a new way to reach them. They don't have to get picked by a commissioning editor to appear on Channel 4. Great if they do, but we can, because we're limitless in the kind of volume that we can do, and it's on demand, we can actually make a showcase for people who otherwise wouldn't necessarily get a TV shot. So we can do things from a very low level. We've got some archive, we'd like to light it up. Have you ever thought of doing a podcast in support of this archive thing that we've got, to a high-end, completely new original? And I remember, when Netflix first were in Europe, they used to tout around this slide that they had, which was their strategy. It was a pyramid, and it had 3 layers to it. And, archive library was all they did for years and years and years. And then they did co-productions, which wasn't really a co-production. It was, I'll give you 5 bob for the streaming rights for something that you've already commissioned, right? And then, as I say, it was only sort of 20 years in, 15 years in, that they made an original. And now it's 90-odd% originals. That's kind of what our model is as well. We've gone from, there's a load of distributed, great filmed contents. We've licensed the best stuff in the world, to co-producing with BBC and Sky, where we put in a bit of money for the streaming rights, to getting into originals. And I think that's what the arts organizations are excited about, because they see they can participate in all of that.
Yeah.
We're
all jumping in.
Well, I was just going to say
Starting
that
the debate, yes.
I think it's quite a complicated question because, and bear with me a second because you also might have seen this program. You presented a really interesting discussion on Sky. Was it at the Globe Theatre?
Yes.
And there was a discussion, I think, I hope I'm not completely reimagining this and making it up, but there was this brilliantly electric bit of the discussion which was sort of about the nature of institutions.
That's
and
right.
There was an amazing writer, I think, who writes for The Spectator.
He does.
Yes.
Igor.
Yes.
And I thought it was so brilliant because I think, and again, forgive me if I'm misquoting, he was sort of saying the thing is that a lot of our institutions are dead, frankly, and the
smash
most
the
interesting
institutions.
stuff
tear them down.
isn't happening in our institutions. And I just thought, God, this is so brilliant. And by the way, I do love a bit of esoteric arts discussion program. I wish there was more. But it was so interesting, and actually I think that posed some really interesting questions. And for me as Channel 4, where our job is to kind of ask tough questions. You know, we were set up to be a sort of challenger. We've got to ask provocative questions, not just about ourselves as an institution, but about everyone else. And we've got to be rattling the cage and constantly questioning and challenging. So in this context, for me, absolutely want to have partnerships, and that is part of our job as a public service broadcaster. And so it's been absolutely amazing working with Manchester and Bristol, and of course all kinds of amazing artists, Sadler as well, you know, brilliant things. But we've also got to ask tough questions about ourselves, our role, and the institutions, and that has got to be part of our questioning, because that's got to be part of arts and culture, right, where we ask tough questions. And so we can be in bed together some of the time, but we have to fall out of bed some of the time.
I was just going to pick up, I wasn't going to mention, but thank you very much, you chaired that debate brilliantly. But actually I was going to come back to that point about the big arts institutions, and, you know, we try and think like you do beyond those, because arts is so broad. It's not just about the big arts institutions. I mean, we also did a programme under lockdown which was about grassroots venues, which is about rock music, essentially, about pub music. And, you know, they're as important. You know, that's where...
Or just people doing their stuff at home.
Or people doing their stuff at home, exactly. So you're right. I mean, that's why when I was saying it's really broad, that's one element of it. But I think you're right. It's about getting out and about. And there's so many smaller institutions who really, really struggle. And it's how we also help support those and give those people a voice and a platform.
And be critical of them as well. We
And
don't
be
just
critical
pile
of
into the
them.
big institutions,
Absolutely.
who I agree are kind of
Yeah.
colonial in some of their attitudes
Yeah.
to the way the world
Yeah.
is. But anyway, Mark.
And sometimes, yeah, I mean, and obviously, you know, broadcasters are institutions too, so we need to be careful not to, you know, to...
I really criticise myself.
Yeah,
Well, please
we're allowed.
criticise me.
Yeah.
Well,
We can take it.
I wanted to say a couple of things. One, I think there's something really interesting about the discussion, the esoteric discussion, which sounded rather derogatory and wasn't intended to be such. But, you know, I think the BBC and Sky and, you know, Channel 4 too, at the back end of the news, do a lot of quite thoughtful discussion, and that's great. Also, radio does a ton of it, and it sits very well there. Radio 3 is full of esoteric arts discussion, and I applaud it. But I wanted to pick up on something that Simon said, which was that what we are as broadcasters are effectively the conduit between the artist and the audience. I think we're actually more than that, or I think we can be. I think that television makers do something quite special. I would absolutely argue that much television is an art alongside, you know, many other arts, including the ones that happen in small and big venues. And I think that what television at its best does is, you know, make a case for art, tell stories about arts, humanize arts, do all sorts of things in all sorts of different ways that electrifies the arts in a really special kind of almost alchemical way at its best. And, you know, and the reason I work in the job I do is precisely because, you know, growing up I saw some arts programs that blew me away, and I thought, wow, Shock of the New, what an amazing thing. Wow, The Burglar and the King, what an extraordinary program. I want to be involved in that. And it wasn't just, I want to go to Graceland and see Elvis Presley and how he eats hamburgers. I wanted to, you know, it was the TV program that I loved. And I think I don't think we should undersell that, because I think it can be really special.
I don't think you can deny that. I think probably, though, it's the last 18 months, though, has, you know, kind of possibly changed the way we engage. I mean, we've always dealt directly with artists and institutions, and a lot of our content, or a great deal of our ideas, come direct from artists, and I think that's really important. And we try not to kind of sometimes give it too much of a telly sort of feel. Some programs need a format and require that. Others, I think, they need to feel that they're really authentic and come from the artist. And it goes back to what you were saying about Grayson and what you were saying.
Well,
that's what Grayson does, and that's
absolutely
brilliant, and that's how you represent that.
Okay, let's just shift to audiences, because you've talked, Barbara, about wanting art for all, and there are different demographics that are associated with different channels and different art forms. I mean, it's interesting. I've moved to design, to the Design Museum, and I'm still wrestling with what is the core audience for design. Is there one? There may be one. Yeah. But actually, the different strands of design and design's genuine permeability to everything means that people who want to see things about architecture aren't necessarily interested in AI or graphic design or fashion or product design or industrial design, or they may be. Whereas, certainly in my experience as Artistic Director of the Royal Academy, the core audience of that institution, 98,000 friends of a certain demographic and class, it has to be said in dominance, they certainly let you know if they didn't like some of the things you did. But the myth that they only wanted Impressionist exhibitions or Renaissance exhibitions is nonsense. They came to most things that were put on there. There's a trust in the organisation. And it was something to do, not just with the institution, but with the notion that art with a capital A means something, and you can play with the range of that. Whereas I'm not sure that exists in design, but I hope so. So putting all that on the table, how are you approaching your pursuit of audiences? I mean, it's a great thing to say, yeah, we want to reach everyone, but the notion that art is a kind of medicine that you dispense to people for their own good certainly doesn't seem to be the approach of your channels. So how are you approaching audiences, and how specifically are you going to try and target that? Let's give the BBC first dibs on it.
I think, obviously we've got multiple channels, as has been alluded to, and I think we do it in different ways. I think primarily now we're less focused on channels and more focused on iPlayer, and I think we're working out how best to deliver that. But when you look at the audiences that are, keep coming back to BBC One and continue to do so, a programme like Fake or Fortune does that very well, and it's a programme that isn't a pure arts programme in the traditional sense. It has sort of format points, and there's, and so brings, television storytelling to art stories or stories about art. And then, at the other sort of end of that range, there are much more pure arts documentaries driven by artists or about artists that are, much more purely about the art. And so I think it is about doing a range of things, but all the time I think television is at its best when it's driven by an idea and a sense of authorship. That's, I suppose,
Well, we'll attract audiences across the board, which is what you're saying, Simon, in a sense. You're surprised by the number of the younger audiences that come to your
and I
platform?
think, and again, it is, I agree with that. And I think, a really good example is what we're just doing with Scottish Ballet. So we have worked with Scottish Ballet to develop a film, a Hollywood quality film of Gene Kelly's Starstruck, which is his sort of love letter to the ballet. It's a pas de deux from back in the 60s. And we worked with his widow, Patricia Kelly. It was amazing. We've worked with the team at Scottish Ballet, and we filmed it. And it looks like a Hollywood MGM musical. It's wonderful. And we're doing a proper premiere next week in London, and it'll be exclusively on Marquee and on Scottish Ballet for a week from next Friday. But that is, why that, and what's the audience? They've got a very good handle on what their current audience is. We can tell them how popular their content is around the world, and we know individual by individual who's watching it, right, and who's engaged with it, and at what minute they stop. As all streamers do, the data we have is as granular as it gets, so we can help them understand. You've got doing a filmic thing like this, which is super entertaining and, probably more mainstream, but the quality of the performances is award-winning, is wonderful. So your absolute purists will love it, but as a company doing really exciting work, and we think this is something that audiences around the world will watch because it's eye-catching, it's wonderful, and it feels seasonal and special.
So do you have evidence that the audiences are much more diverse or different than the accepted wisdom?
And that was my point. We've got two spikes in our sort of demographic. One is your classic demographic, right? And one is a very diverse, properly global. They're hugely promiscuous, by the way. They're people who'll subscribe for a month, binge watch everything, and then bugger off, and you have to sort of find them again because it costs money to use our service. I was talking to someone at one of the other streamers who said they'd done some analysis that said EasyJet used to be one of their big competitors because they had this sort of demographic of cultural explorers who had £100 a month to spend on stuff. Sometimes they'd spend it on going to exhibitions and concerts in Marquee TV. Sometimes they'd spend it going to Berlin for a weekend. It's slightly nuts. But yeah, we've got, and that's why it's a sort of synergistic thing, because arts organisations want to tap into that audience. They're audiences who consume everything through this device, right? And if you don't have not just a stream performance, because you can watch a stream performance in lots of places, but a rich experience which is branded and properly curated, then they're not going to engage. And we're doing that, but we only do it by successfully partnering with the organisation. putting money on the table, right? And the other angle, to your points about marketing, you know, if I'm marketing a Scottish Ballet piece next week, I could spend, you know, what most streamers do is spend a lot of money with Mark Zuckerberg, whose algorithms will find you Scottish Ballet fans and people who look like Scottish Ballet fans, because that's how digital marketing works, look-alike audiences. I'd rather say to Scottish Ballet, you know who those people are, because they're in your ticketing database. You sold them a ticket last year, or they're in your email newsletter. Please can I give you the money rather than send it to Silicon Valley, and let's work together. So for us, a partnership is, yes, content, and ideally original content, and ideally exclusive for a period of time, but also marketing. We'll work with an organization who has no content, because guess what? They've got the audience, and we can work with them around the audience too. And then events. We're an app, so we can drive you to an event and help you have a good time. We're helping you live your best cultural life. There are users of our service who pay 100 quid a year to be a member of Marquee TV and don't watch anything. They use it, you know, to engage and to find out about things. And that's okay with us, as long as they're getting a value from being part of our brand.
Barbara.
I mean, I was just going to say it's almost an impossible question, really, isn't it, to define an arts audience? And when I understand what you're saying about design, and that's in one particular thing, you know, people like one aspect of it and not another. I think to define a whole arts, I mean, that's when I said right at the beginning, our content is so diverse, and that represents the viewers.
And you have specific audiences for specific projects.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. I mean, we're not afraid to cater for niche audiences. We know that, you know, and we have the freedom to do that, and that's really important to us. You know, if we're saying arts is for everybody, then you want to cater for, you know, groups of people who are interested in a particular subject. Obviously, we want people to watch. I mean, there's no point in making television if nobody's watching. I think we all agree that. But when you're not kind of chasing ratings, I think that's a real freedom. You know, so that, you know, you have your big hitters like portrait and landscape artists, and that allows us then the freedom to be able to do niche things. So, for example, we worked with an artist-driven idea. We worked with Marina Abramovich, the performance artist.
The takeover of the channel.
The takeover of the channel. We gave her 6 hours and said, do what you want. Now, we knew that, you know, people weren't going to come in droves to watch Marina do amazing performance art, but it was extraordinary. And it, you know, the people who enjoyed it really enjoyed it and loved it. You know, we did the third day. We gave the channel over to Punch Drunk to do a 12-hour theatre piece. That's great. You know, they're not big ratings drivers. However, they all kind of add up to the sum of their parts, you know, and that's what's really interesting. So we can do, you know, the live revival, looking at grassroots, which is a very specific thing, going to small venues around the country. You're not going to, it's not Noel Gallagher concert, you know, which is going to bring in huge ratings, but it's very important for us to give voice to all of those people, you know, and people do come in for specific things.
I think it's really interesting as well is that one thing that we've all touched on is the fact that television's changed enormously with the advent of on-demand, in that, you know, we've all got on-demand. You know, we're all on-demand platforms now, and so suddenly television is not, you know, an arts television programme is not just on at 11:15 on BBC Two. It's there for a while, and you can pick it up and you can see it, and it means that suddenly we can make programmes that might not completely knock it out of the park on the overnights, but actually, if they're made well enough and they have enough authority, you know, it was tough, you know, and by the time we got to episode 7 or 8 on civilizations, I was thinking, oh, you know, we're nearly there now. And yet
we've reached civilization.
But by the end of after a couple of years, the cumulative reach of that, because we left it up there for a long time, the cumulative reach was, you know, lots of people had watched it, and it was a very, you know, in the end, it stood the test of time.
They find it in their own time.
And people found it.
Yeah.
And
it's still nice. I mean, I completely chase ratings, and I absolutely would love ratings for arts programmes, but we're all completely, like, we're all for first now, and we want everybody to come and watch all four. But equally, for public service broadcasters, those sort of shared national moments are really special and especially prized, and it's something that the streamers don't quite share with us still. So I felt like the thing that, in a way, I loved the most about Grayson's Art Club was that when it was on 8 o'clock on a Friday.
Yeah, it was an event.
For people who loved it, it really was an event, and we would get 1.2 million people tweeting while they were watching it, really enjoying it, and then, you know, chatting to each other on the, you know, in the Facebook group or whatever. And it really was an appointment to view for those people who love that programme. And So that felt really amazing to me, to find something that was popular and was working at 8 p.m. felt really brilliant for an arts program, felt like something really special and quite something we hadn't done on Channel 4 for a long time. So I think that thing of having that kind of shared viewing on a public service channel was really, really exciting. But then obviously we want to try and pull people to, to All 4 or whatever. But for me, it's really quite targeted. I want to try and do the popular thing that means something, makes sense of the sort of world we're living in and our shared experiences, and has all the sort of real world things and everything we've all talked about. But I really do want people to watch in as big numbers as possible, which is part of the reason why I like body parts, because the kind of, that whole strand of, and it's a real obsession in art through all time of how do we make sense with the body. It's also a kind of huge sort of contemporary identity issue. And a lot of young people, as well as lots of other people, came to 100 Vaginas, which was, basically about women's relationships with their bodies. Me and My Penis, similarly with men. Bring Back the Bush, which was about pubic hair. All did really well with young audiences. And so my big question for the future is, how do we find programs that resonate with young people at the same time as sort of kind of dealing with our sort of contemporary concerns and obsessions? And if we can kind of deliver stuff that is kind of gritty and interesting and challenging and brilliantly beautiful to watch and really artistic and young people watch it and it does well in ratings and works on All 4, that is the absolute sweet spot for me.
Yeah, no pressure there. I didn't say that we would take questions from the floor, so I'm not duty bound to do that. But actually, morally, I am, because we agreed beforehand in the green room we were going to take questions from the floor. So I've got more questions, by the way. So don't worry about the death tumbleweed silence. But are there questions? Yeah, there are. Okay, there's one there.
I've got 2 questions actually.
To go with one first.
Oh, I'll go with one. I'll go with the first one. That is, do you have trouble, getting people to know your stuff is on? I think the electronic program guides, and I'm sure now there are so many channels. So you look at the EPG, and you might actually miss a program, given there. Is it now 11 Sky channels or whatever? It's quite a lot to go through to find your program. How do you actually find out? And do you find, if people regularly look to see if there's something on BBC4 or Sky Arts or whatever, or All 4 or whatever, that's fine. Do you think people actually miss programs simply because they don't know they're on?
I'm sure we all miss programs, don't we? You're right. There's a huge range of telly out there. Titles on an EPG, we talk about that all the time. I'm sure you're the same. Talking about vaginas, that's going to make you pause and go, hello, might watch that.
Well, there isn't a content for that, but you can actually go on your catch-up TV and say, it's kind of entertainment rather than body parts.
Exactly. So, you're right, there is a huge amount of content, but it goes back to Mark's point as well, talking about civilization. If you miss something, for most people there is the on-demand and catch-up. Talkability about our programmes is really important, so if you get press and you see that there's we did a thing about statues. You were talking about provocations, so we occasionally like to do a provocation. We wanted to look at statues and how we would approach the debate on statues. So we turned it into an art event. So you get a nice, you get a nice bit of press, and you might get a pick of the day, and then people will find it. So sometimes you have to search for stuff, of course. But otherwise, there's always the on-demand offering, which I think we all offer, which is if you've missed out and people are talking about it, that's the other thing. If people are talking about it, you said that after Civilization, people go, missed that.
We're going to hear it for the Radio Times.
Yeah, Radio Times, obviously. Many people still go to Radio Times. I think they're quite
the circle around the programme, still do that.
And we love that. But I think you have to use all possible ways to make your programme visible. And I think that's a mixture of sort of doing events. We did live drawing live in lockdown, which was, did it across 2 channels and made it a sort of moment. And people talked about it. We can, maybe talk about it on the one show on the night of transmission and make people aware of it that way. I think you use every possible way to draw attention to the broadcast, because I agree with Shaminder that the broadcast is still, it does feel like a main event, and I think that without the broadcast, it's just a drop, it's just there, and, how do you get that talkaboutability? Netflix did an amazing job with Squid Game, everybody was talking about it, and suddenly everybody was wanting to watch it. But it's quite, we have the advantage of it, it's there and it arrives, and people go, oh my God, are you going to watch that tonight? And it's terrific when there's some talk about it the day after, and I think people envy that. We're not going to chuck that away. It's great to have that, it's thrilling to have it actually on the telly. It's also great that people can catch up on it when they can't see it or decide to watch some, one of Shaminder's provocative programs.
I was just going to say that if you're a pure streamer, it just works in a different way, right? There is no program guide, and we're a community, and people have the app. If you're a member, you've got the app, and the app will notify you when something comes up. It'll notify you when something's new. It knows what you like. It'll guide you to those things. And people tend to watch, 80% of what gets watched is what's on the home screen, right? So it's about activating, engaging an existing community and getting them to bring in other people. So it's a completely different, I've come from a TV background, but I've had to learn a whole new grammar of community management and engagement, and that's really what it is. I'm old enough to have been involved in .com1 things, right? And we used to say content community commerce, and that's what it is. We have people who come in because they want to buy a ticket for something or some merch for something. People who want to come and exchange views. We've got people in America watching an RSC performance and self-organising in the app to come and fly to Stratford once lockdown's over. So it's very much community-driven. So actually, in the same way your Cardo will ping you a notification and make you buy stuff, because it reminds you you've run out of loo roll. Not quite in that way. I didn't say loo roll. We can remind people there's an amazing new piece of,
I think that's about speaking to your viewer. I mean, we do a Sky Arts newsletter, which every customer of Sky gets, exactly. And that goes out every week and gives you a little bit like your Radio Times, a digital Radio Times.
It's great to have the community, but the other thing about, and this is one of the way things are changing, things are splintering, people are finding their interest and sticking with it. But one of the things that television has always done and does really well is offer people a range of things, and sometimes you happen upon things. Yeah. And those are the amazing moments that we all treasure. You think, oh my God, I didn't know I was going to watch that amazing
Me and My Penis.
That amazing program with Tim Marlow at the Globe. And those are serendipitous and joyful, and I still want to fly the flag for those moments where people happen upon things, because I think it's one of the joys. It's the same as actually when you go to a gallery and you suddenly see something you weren't expecting.
Turn a corner, find something.
Well, no, that's the interesting thing, isn't it? That arts television specifically, but a lot of great television in general, it introduces people to things they didn't know they were interested in. And the problem about echo chambering and actually targeting groups is that you end up reinforcing areas that they know they like. So anyway, it's a good question. Yeah, there's one back there.
We've heard a lot about some fantastic programs, documentaries that are to do with participation and about involving people. For me, for the arts to be experiencing a golden age, I'd love to hear, particularly Mark and Shaminder, talk about more that is art as television. Where are those pieces that are being made that are about the marriage of art and dance or art and music, that are not the recording, the beautiful colour photocopy of a fabulous opera that's going on at the Royal Opera House? And especially now that we have iPlayer, can we not break away from the rigour or push the envelope of running times? Could you talk a little bit about what you are commissioning, not maybe from the big organisations? We all know that 90% of creative industries or creative organisations are SMEs. What are you doing with smaller creative bodies and creative filmmakers that is about putting art and creativity together and making something special?
I think Mark talked for quite a long time about all his amazing programmes, couldn't you? That combine art and television in an amazing way.
I don't want to hog the limelight, but I really love to see television, actually, showing arts authorship. And Shaminder reminded me that we did a programme earlier in the year called Delia, Derbyshire, the Myths and the Legendaries tapes, which was Caroline Katz was the director and the key participant in it, the protagonist who played Delia. We intercut it with Delia Archive, what there was of it. Cozy Fanny Tutti, who's an electronic musician, worked with the archive of her audio to create a sound bed for the film. And it was a really sort of brave and experimental thing. It was Caroline's first long-form directorial piece, and it won the Adam Yauch Award at South by Southwest for the most original piece of filmmaking in the arts of the year. So I think we do still make those programs. The important thing, though, is to try and find out how to get people to them. And I love making programs like that, and it feels like a real privilege. But we can't just do that. We do have to find things that play at 8 o'clock and, you know, appeal to broad audiences who will take all sorts of things from them beyond here's an artist being able to express themselves on television in a particular way. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's both. Both are important.
I love that. I think that whole idea that you're talking about, Anne, of sort of television as a canvas for artists to, you know, do an amazing piece of work in collaboration with a TV broadcaster is, you know, it's given us some of the greatest programs. Like I mentioned Battle of Orgreave. One of my favourite is The Arbour, which was on More for Clio Barnard, which I think those, you know, as you say, experimental, amazing pieces. But I think I would like to think if somebody came and pitched me The Arbour tomorrow, I would, you know, tie myself to a radiator in Ian Catt's office without, I would hope that I could see that was bloody amazing, you know, era-defining piece of work that had to get on television. But I do think that we are in such a new world now. There are so many other canvases, not just the TV screen. There's all sorts of other platforms. There's the amazing things you talked about, like, you know, a kind of amazing space that you made on the channel for the Punch Drunk piece, for example, Romeo and Juliet. You know, there's all kinds of stuff going on digital, which is kind of blowing our minds. NFTs, like, it's all, like, everything's being rewritten and it's moving so fast we don't even know. So I think there's kind of amazing stuff going on around us with creative people, and we can no longer think of ourselves as the one screen that's going to deliver the defining artworks and creative collaborations that define our age. We will hopefully continue to be part of that, but we're part of a much bigger and more extraordinary universe now, aren't we? Yeah.
I mean, you chained to a radiator in Ian Catt's is like a Marina Abramovich performance.
Exactly. And
actually,
like a bit of I did love that.
And that takeover was
did.
partly what you were alluding to, where, I don't know if you saw, I mean, it was a long evening. I loved it. But the endurance that she puts herself through, the audience was invited to take part in that.
Yeah.
And some of us who've worked with Marina weren't up to it.
Did you do the
but
stare?
I gave it a go, but
Because
a couple of
what I
hours.
was trying to say was that I've heard the story because I love the kind of the runes of sort of TV commissioning, and, you know, like you read Jeremy Isaac's book and you think, oh my God, it was amazing what they thought about opera back then in the 80s and everything, and it's so interesting. So I'd really try and find those stories of how was that brilliant thing that I love commissioned or whatever. Yeah. And I have to say that most times, and again, I hope that I have not completely turned down something that was really brilliant as that, but most times the commissioners were blown away when they heard that idea pitched to them, you know, for these pieces that we all talk about. You just think, oh my God, that's so different, that's so unique, that's so special, that's amazing. That is actually the only thing I really care about. If I can commission that, I'll die tomorrow, sort of thing. So I don't think that happens every day, or maybe I'm just trying to kind of tell that to myself. Maybe I'm just missing them, but the special things are still pretty special, aren't they? There's not. Yeah. I don't feel like I'm being kind of like. I'm not meaning to be rude at all, because I, don't have brilliant ideas at all. But I don't feel like I'm being blown over 500 times a day by something that is going to be.
But you want to be able to be able to give people the opportunity to make experimental things. And I think what, Channel 4 did with Random Acts and we've been doing with the new creative programme is absolutely provide a platform for people who want to start out on that journey to make something big eventually. And some of them will, some of them won't. But that's an important thing too.
That's quite different from a sort of a £1 million film that's going
to
change the world.
It's a difference.
Well, creative failure is a great subject. That's another panel discussion, actually, we could do. Look, I want to get one more question before the...
I was kind of wondering, do you find that you end up working with the same production companies over and over again and taking pictures from the same production companies? And sort of, by extension, if you're a production company that doesn't necessarily have massive kind of arts pedigree, but you think you've got an interesting idea, what is the best way into kind of pitching that?
Well, I would say we don't end up working with the same production companies again and again, probably due to the range of the content. I mean, obviously there are certain Certain producers we work with regularly to deliver a particular kind of content. So if we're doing festival coverage, there's a company that we work with who we know specialise in that and they deliver, but that's a very specific thing. Otherwise, I mean, the key thing that's really important for us is that if you're pitching to Sky Arts, for example, that you acquaint yourself with the content on the channel. So we don't really mind where we get pitches from. We get pitches directly from artists. Sometimes if we have an idea ourselves, which we do, we sit around like you do and we have a chat about, do we want to go into this particular area? We'll brief out to indies, we'll throw a brief out there and people respond. And that's quite an exciting way of going about things. But I think the key thing for us is understanding the channel, and people who work with us regularly kind of grow with us and they understand, you know, how we adapt to change. I mean, you'd be surprised when you say you're not blown away by these £1 million ideas. The amount of times, I don't know if this happens to you with Grayson, but we get pitched, I would say, a variation of Portrait Artist of the Year, probably 5 times a year, and the programme's been on for 8 years. And you kind of go, if you're going to pitch an idea, then watch the channel and familiarise yourself with that content. So we don't limit who we make programmes with. We work with a whole range of people. Sometimes if we're working with an institution or a smaller institution, or we're working outside of London, we will seek out indies in the regions. So we're very open to ideas coming in, and no, and we don't have a kind of specific list of indies that we work with, just that we only work with.
You could be a woman with a photocopier in a basement in Ballet, and I wouldn't mind. Like, you know what I mean? I just literally, for me, it is about the idea, and I work with all sorts, apart from the Grayson projects that are made by Swan Films. Yeah. It is a huge range, and in fact, I love working with lots of different companies, and Channel 4 work with a huge number of different production companies, because that is one of our sort of raison d'etre, is that we work with lots of different production companies, and the ecosystem of production companies all across the nations, regions, and everywhere in the UK is so important to us. So I will take pictures from anybody, and as Mark mentioned, random acts. We don't do as many as we used to in you know, once upon a time, but we still make some, and they are very, very small, interesting projects. And basically, anyone can pitch to us, and it's all about the idea.
But actually, going back to that, which I think is really interesting, actually, is the reason we, same as you, don't work with the same indies, is that they tend to turn out the same ideas. Sometimes they can, whereas actually, if you're a woman in the kitchen, you know, can come up with something that's just really gripping, and then you can kind of help umbrella them with other indies if that's necessary, but it's all about the idea. So.
Yeah, I was going to just add one thing, which is just one note of caution for us, which is that we do have a kind of system where we just check that, you know, you as a company will have the capacity to make the thing that you're proposing, because, you know, we do need it's the license payers' money, and we need to show a bit of responsibility for that.
We'll work with anyone, because we're a startup, so, you know, we're making up as we go along.
We could send you some of those women from kitchens.
Okay, we've actually run out of time, but I've still got the authorities to have one more question. So there's a question here in the foreground, as your hand was up first, and then you can ask questions afterwards over a drink. I can hand the panel over to you. Anyway, last question.
Born Octopus TV. Following on, it was a very wise question actually about the commissioning process and also acquisition. But maybe you can touch on rights and also budgets, which you mentioned briefly. But any insights into either of those, the commissioning process, acquisition of existing content, and the sort of budgets and rights would be very helpful from each of you.
Who's going to go? Well, I can say we don't have tariffs specifically. So, I mean, I don't work in acquisitions, I work in original commissioning. But essentially, we don't set tariffs. So we look, I mean, we're an arts channel. We all work to arts budgets. I think that's the...
Budgets have diminished in the last decade, is that fair to say?
I think they probably, well, it depends. I think it depends. Probably. I think, but the thing about art, I mean, we all know this, I mean, it's the reality of the world, isn't it? You put arts in front of something and that means less money. So we have a limited budget, so we have to be very careful about how we carve that up, which is why we look at the breadth of content, but we don't have tariffs. We look at everything on its merit. So even when people are pitching an idea at the beginning, we just say, don't put a price on it, just send us the idea, and then we can kind of work on that together. But no, we don't work to tariffs. We don't have set tariffs.
Rights.
UK and Ireland. I mean, that's our territory. You're global.
This is why when we co-commission, and we'll put in half the money, you put in half the money, and you know, then we'll have a fight about, you know, with Patrick about I want it on iPlayer for 5 years. come on, we want global rights, global streaming rights. We're very happy to have a window for if we have a territory-based partner. And we've done, Crystal Pipe films we've commissioned with BBC Two, which have, been huge hits in the States, but we haven't been able to have them on our platform because BBC Two was maybe going to show them and they end up on iPlayer. And I think
a very, very highly regarded destination for Betroffenheit and other.
It was all wonderful. On commission, the way we tend to work is to have a long-term partnership. So we'll go, okay, London Philharmonic Orchestra, I've just signed a new 2-year deal with them. That covers a whole bunch of things, including some commissioning. We made Turn of the Screw with John Wilson conducting and Wilton's musical. And it's a film, but is it a performance or what is it? And actually, that was done on a total shoestring budget, but is award-winning, wonderful. So it's, it is. I know it's the how long is a piece of string thing, but if someone comes with a brilliant idea and we can partner with one of these guys, we can make the budget happen. So it's got a TV outing as well. Then that's the way the world is going. It's like movies. It's a co-production type model now.
It's interesting because the wrestle is about back end in the end, because and that will continue because increasingly people want on demand, and the iPlayer is the destination, and we'll want it for some long time. And one of the things about an arena program, it's fantastic that some of those arena programs, when they were made, we got all rights in perpetuity, non-exclusive in perpetuity. So there's some of them are still up there. You still go and see the Chelsea Hotel or whatever, and that's marvellous. But the world has changed, and you can't always get that.
Who'd have thought a question about rights would have just put the kind of first crack in this collegial editing? Nice. Very good. Nice way in which to end. I think the RTS would like to end the event.
I learned so much from this panel. I'm Teresa Wise, I run the RTS. So I love the sort of thoughts about arts being much more than just the artistic event itself, but everything else, the democratization trend. And also I love the idea of being helped to live my best cultural life. Thank you, Simon. So I really want to thank the speakers who've been terrific. Thank you, Mark Bell, Barbara Lee, Shaminder Nahal, and Simon Walker. Thanks so much to you. Thank you so much to Tim Marlow for chairing very elegantly. Thank you, Phil Barnes, as ever, for producing such a terrific session.